The BBC News at 1 o'clock with Ben Brown.
Today at 1, the Prime Minister defends the decisions made by the government during the COVID pandemic when he was Chancellor. At the COVID inquiry, Rishi Sunak issued an apology to all those who suffered and lost loved ones.
It's important that we learn the lessons so that we can be better prepared in the future.
And he is expected to be asked at the inquiry about his controversial Eat Out to Help Out scheme during the pandemic. It's also an important day for the Prime Minister at Westminster. MPs from rival factions of the Conservative Party are deciding whether they will support his Rwanda bill this week aimed at stopping migrants on small boats. Also this afternoon was this young man the victim of synthetic opioids flooding into the UK from China. A warning that longer, hotter British summers could mean more disease-spreading mosquitoes.
I believe in miracles since you came along, you sexy thing.
And why the Hollywood superstar Timothée Chalamet thinks people in Hull have Britain's sexiest accent.
And coming up on BBC London, McDonald's apologises after one of their security guards soaked the ground where a homeless man was sleeping. But we're told the problem is widespread for rough sleepers.
Hello, good afternoon. At the COVID inquiry, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has apologised to all those who suffered as a result of the government's decisions during the pandemic. He's also expected to face questions about his controversial Eat Out to Help Out scheme aimed at helping the hospitality sector during the pandemic. Well, scientific advisors have already told the inquiry they didn't know about the plan until it was announced, and there were concerns that it would spread the virus. Our political correspondent Pete Saul has been watching.
It was at news conferences like this that many of us got to know Rishi Sunak. He'd been promoted to the job of Chancellor just before a global pandemic struck. Of course, a lot of politics has happened since then. He's moved from number 11 to number 10. And this morning made the trip across London for a grilling about his actions in the time of COVID. Quite something to see a current Prime Minister taking an oath and being cross-examined by a King's Counsel. First things first, an apology.
I just wanted to start by saying how deeply sorry I am to all of those who lost loved ones, family members through the pandemic, and also all those who suffered in the various different ways throughout the pandemic and as a result of the actions were taken.
Much of this morning's questioning has focused on the relationship between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. Was the then Chancellor too powerful an influence over the Prime Minister?
I saw the Prime Minister probably more than I saw my own wife for this period of time. We were working very closely together, as I was with my other cabinet colleagues, and as a general rule, I was able to participate in everything that I felt I needed to or ought to.
And he defended his former boss against the accusation that he presided over a chaotic workplace.
It's right that there was vigorous debate because these were incredibly consequential decisions for tens of millions of people in all spheres, whether it was health, whether it was education, whether it was economic, whether it was social, whether it was the long-term impacts. These were incredibly big decisions, the likes of which no Prime Minister had taken in decades.
Rishi Sunak's been portrayed by other key witnesses as a strong anti-lockdown voice, more concerned with protecting the economy than saving lives. His argument, he was just doing his job.
My, I'd say, almost constitutional responsibility as Chancellor of the Exchequer was to make sure that the Prime Minister had the economic, the analysis and the advice relating to the economic and fiscal implications or consequences of the decisions that he was considering.
He'll face more questions this afternoon, including, in all likelihood, on this, the Eat Out to Help Out scheme of summer 2020. The virus had retreated somewhat, and the Chancellor served it up in an attempt to boost the economy. But did he and the wider government sideline the scientists? Peter Saul, BBC News.
Yeah, so we are expecting the COVID inquiry to hear evidence this afternoon about whether or not Rishi Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out scheme did spread the disease and potentially cost lives. Let's get more on this from our correspondent Nick Eardley, who's been looking through the data. Nick.
Thanks a lot, Ben. There was only a brief mention of Eat Out to Help Out this morning. We're expecting a lot more this afternoon. But let's start off with a bit of the context about numbers. This was July 2020 when Eat Out to Help Out was announced. As you can see here, cases are low, around 4,300 a week. You can see here the situation in August when the scheme begins. Again, cases are still pretty low. It is worth remembering there was often a delay between infection and it showing up in the figures. And look what happens over the next few weeks as the scheme goes on, but crucially into September. By mid-September, cases are up around 26,000 a week. It's also worth remembering there were a lot of changes happening at the time. Schools had gone back, more of the economy had opened up. So you can't be sure that all of this is because of Eat Out to Help Out. It's also worth remembering that the biggest spikes, which led to the January lockdown that you can see over here, came later. That's a huge increase over the winter months. However, we have heard from some of the experts advising the government. They think the scheme, in all likelihood, would have contributed to the rise in cases. Just a flavour of what we've heard at the inquiry so far. We've heard from Chris Whitty, who was the Chief Medical Officer, calling it, we're told, Eat Out to Help Out the virus. We heard from his deputy, Jonathan Van Tam, who said the idea of the scheme didn't feel sensible to him. One government advisor, this woman, Dame Angela McLean, even called Rishi Sunak Dr. Death. Now, there has been a study into all of this. This was the University of Warwick. It thinks that Eat Out to Help Out added around 1 in 6 cases, a pretty significant increase. But we should point out not everyone is convinced by that. Other experts have said the scheme is unlikely to have had a big impact on how winter 2020 played out. It's also worth having a look at this, a comparison with other European countries. Have a look at France and Spain. Big increases there in the number of cases, bigger than the UK. Neither France nor Spain had their own equivalent of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. There's also the economic argument we've heard Rishi Sunak start to talk about this morning. Hospitality was struggling. You had to balance the economic priorities over the summer with health needs. So it's complicated. The answer is actually quite nuanced in truth. But there are two things that are pretty tricky for the Prime Minister. One, experts have said they weren't consulted. Two, a number of the same experts have suggested the scheme wasn't a good idea. For example, the former Chief Scientific Advisor, Patrick Vallance, he was asked by the inquiry if it's likely that the scheme contributed to deaths. His answer was that it was highly likely. All questions Rishi Sunak is likely to face later, Ben.
Indeed. All right, Nick, thank you very much indeed. Nick Eardley reporting there. Well, it is a potentially difficult week for the Prime Minister, with the fate of legislation on his flagship Rwanda policy resting in the hands of various factions of the Conservative Party. Now, they're holding some key meetings today to decide whether or not they will support the bill. Rishi Sunak claims his legislation will stop most legal challenges against asylum seekers being sent to Rwanda. The vote on the bill is tomorrow. And our political correspondent, Hannah Miller, is at Westminster for us now. Hannah, what is your latest information on how Tory MPs might vote on this?
Well, this meeting of the right-wing group, the ERG group of MPs, is still going on at the moment. But they've essentially sought their own legal advice on the Rwanda legislation, and they have, in the last few minutes, given us a summary of what it says. They say that the Rwanda bill provides a partial and incomplete solution to what they see as the problem of the courts potentially being able to stop asylum seekers from being sent to Rwanda. They say it would require very significant amendments which are potentially outside the current scope of the bill, and that the final bill they would like to see would look very different. Now, it's unclear at the moment exactly what they're going to do about that. Essentially, they face three choices. They could choose to back the bill tomorrow and then hope to make the changes that they want to see further down the line. That would get Rishi Sunak off the hook for now, but could potentially spell trouble in January. They could choose to abstain, which is a problem if enough of them choose to do it, or they could vote it down. The problem for the government is that they already say they've gone as far as they can with this legislation, and they have other groups of Conservative MPs also meeting later on who are worried that this already goes too far. So the challenge in navigating this Rwanda legislation is very much still on Rishi Sunak's plate.
Hannah, thank you very much. Hannah Miller. The BBC has learned that dozens of deaths in the last 6 months have been linked to super-strength synthetic opioids called nitazines. Now, they can be many times stronger than heroin, and they're coming into the UK from China. The mother of a young man thought to have died from a fatal overdose linked to the drugs fears there could be an epidemic of them. She's been talking to our Midlands correspondent, Navtesh Johal.
He was funny, pretty, brilliant dancer, so kind. Like, just kind.
Every month, Simeon McAnoy, a salesman, would travel on 3 buses to deliver flowers to his mum.
I'm not going to have that this month, or any other month, from now on.
Simeon died just 9 weeks ago from a drug overdose. He was 33 years old. An inquest will determine his cause of death, but the coroner has told his family that a new, potent synthetic opioid was found in his system, known as a nitazine. It's believed that at the time, Simeon thought he was taking heroin.
We're sitting in the living room with Simeon in a box. That's all we got left for that. I don't know how I'll ever come back from it.
Simeon died here in Birmingham, but his death is not the only one linked to nitazines around here in recent months. It's become a problem in this city and across the country. Nitazines can be hundreds of times stronger than heroin. National Crime Agency data shared with the BBC shows that nitazines have been linked to at least 54 deaths in the last 6 months, with 40 more awaiting further testing. It's believed that a crackdown on heroin production in Afghanistan has led to an increase in synthetic opioids being found in the drug supply here. The National Crime Agency says nitazines are an absolute priority and is working with other agencies to target criminals involved in their supply.
They're likely to be being produced in illicit labs within China, and they are probably coming into the UK through a number of different vectors, but including fast parcels and post.
Amy's been using heroin for more than 20 years. She's tried nitazines dozens of times in recent months, but is now in hospital seeking treatment to stop using them. We've agreed not to use her full name or show her face.
It's like a blanket, but it's like a warm rush across your body. It just puts you out like a light. I mean, they call it gouging. I mean, you're just out of it for at least an hour. It's too dangerous. You know, I want to stop. I've got to stop it. There's too many people that I know that are dying of it, and God, one of these days it's just going to be me.
Drug charities say they're worried about the impact nitazines are having on drug users. They're warning them of their dangers, encouraging safer use and calling for more testing. The government said it will ban 15 new synthetic opioids, including the one linked to Simeon's death. But Jackie wants to see more being done.
I want awareness, the government to step in and protect our young people. Otherwise, this is going to become an epidemic and we're going to lose a lot of young people.
Navtesh Johal, BBC News.
Heavy fighting continues in Gaza, where Hamas has warned that the hostages it still holds will die unless Israel frees more Palestinian prisoners in exchange. Israel claims its troops have so far killed some 7,000 fighters from Hamas, which is designated a terror organisation by the UK government. The United Nations General Assembly is likely to vote this week on another call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Let's get the latest from our Middle East correspondent Yolande Knell, who's in Jerusalem for us now. Yolande, how do you see the chances of another truce?
Well, it's Qatar, of course, that mediated that previous deal, exchanging Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners and an increase in aid going into Gaza. Now, Qatar says it is still trying to mediate a new truce, but the opportunity is narrowing for such a deal. And that has led to that chilling threat, really, from Hamas, that unless Israel agrees to its demands, not a single Israeli hostage will make it out of the Gaza Strip alive. Now, Israel remains adamant that it will not end this war until it has defeated Hamas. And then you look in the Israeli media at the moment, there's a lot of analysts talking to Israeli military officials. They're saying they want to continue the war with this intensity. That's with several army divisions deep inside the Gaza Strip until the end of next month. But there's speculation that won't really be able to happen because you have so much domestic pressure with families of hostages calling for a new release deal, and also, of course, growing international pressure of the likes we're seeing at the UN over the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Yolan, thank you very much indeed. Yolan Nell there, our Middle East correspondent. Now here, the UK's Health Security Agency is warning that longer and warmer summers could increase the risk of disease-spreading mosquitoes becoming established in this country. The agency has been looking at the potential health effects of climate change and what the future could look like in what it calls a plausible worst-case scenario. Our global health correspondent Tulip Mazunda has this report.
The Aedes albopictus mosquito, also known as the Asian tiger mosquito, so called for its distinctive white stripes and the fact that it's native to tropical and subtropical areas of Southeast Asia. But as our planet warms, the UK's Health Security Agency is warning that parts of the country could become ideal for these blood-sucking insects to establish themselves here and start spreading diseases such as dengue, Zika and chikungunya. Although generally not deadly, they can cause severe illness.
If these mosquitoes become established in the UK, there will be a set of actions that we'll take with local authorities to try and prevent their growth in our environment. So there are interventions that we can take to modify the environment to reduce the risk of from those mosquitoes. And that will also potentially include advice to people in their home, particularly in terms of how we store and manage water, for example, in our gardens and outdoors.
The mosquitoes have already been responsible for local outbreaks of dengue fever in France in recent years. Scientists now predict London could see regular infections by 2060. It is the UK HSA's job to look out for and protect us against these kinds of threats. It also warns of a rise in heat-related deaths and flooding in the future. But it says this planning is for a plausible worst-case scenario and points out that many of the threats can still be avoided if action is taken now. Tulip Mazumdar, BBC News.
Well, meanwhile, it is crunch time at the COP28 Climate Summit in Dubai, where delegates from almost 200 countries are now trying to negotiate a global agreement on limiting carbon emissions. Let's go to our climate editor, Justin Rolat, who is there for us at the summit in Dubai. Justin, what are they hoping to agree on, and is it likely to be a meaningful agreement?
Well, let me say, we've just got the latest text, so it's literally just dropped in the last few minutes, and I'm reading through it. Now, listen, I should warn you, we think we've got the latest text. We hope this is accurate. Also, I'm literally analysing it on the hoof. It seems to be fairly strong. It's a much more complex text. It talks about reducing fossil fuels, so phasing down fossil fuels. It talks about the need to increase renewable energy, switch to low carbon technologies. It talks about accelerating a sustainable, affordable and inclusive energy transition. But listen, what's really interesting, there appears to be no options here. This appears to be a final text. Normally they have an option that says, or no text at all on this subject, or other alternatives. This looks really like quite a comprehensive agreement that recognises something the world has never done before, that at the heart of the problem that the world faces on climate change is fossil fuels. They produce the emissions warming our atmosphere. This says we need to phase fossil fuels down. Let's see if it is passed now.
Justin, thank you very much indeed. Justin Rolat there, our climate editor. And the time is just coming up to 20 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The Prime Minister defends the decisions made by the government during the COVID pandemic when he was Chancellor. And making Panto accessible for all with relaxed performances.
And on BBC London, we hear from a young reporter about the problem of living in overcrowded conditions, a situation that thousands of Londoners and their families will find themselves in this Christmas. Join us for that and more at 1:30.
There are fears that signs of cancer in pregnant women are being overlooked, with symptoms often dismissed as related to the pregnancy. Every day, 2 women are diagnosed with cancer while they're expecting a child. Louise Beavers from Lincolnshire was told she had breast cancer while pregnant, and she's been talking to our reporter, Alex Moss.
So thank you for filling the room up, and I feel really loved.
She turned 40 and found out she was pregnant with her 4th child. She also learned she had cancer.
I was called back in and saw the surgeon and was told it was cancer.
Surgeons operated quickly. Baby Susie arrived in August, but not long after she found out the cancer was terminal.
No one healthcare professional will put a time limit to how long I've got left, and that in itself is really difficult to deal with because I need to put plans in place for my children, you know, for special birthdays, life events.
At the start of her pregnancy, she found a lump in her breast, but she was reassured it was likely due to her being pregnant.
I knew it wasn't right for me, and I just wish I persisted at that time as opposed to have accepted. I really, really do. That it could have been a whole different story than one I'm telling now.
Experts say there needs to be a greater awareness within the healthcare profession to spot cancer early in pregnancy and save lives.
Because breast cancer is a disease that becomes more common as you get older, the likelihood of pregnancy and breast cancer occurring at the same time increases. One of our jobs is to make sure that we educate healthcare professionals involved in the care of pregnant women about how breast cancer itself can present at that time.
We've got 2 children who've lost their mum, one who was only weeks old and one who was 3.5.
Pete lost his wife to cancer not long after the birth of their 2nd child.
And there just was nothing that's tailored specifically for a cancer diagnosis in or around childbirth.
So he set up a charity to help those diagnosed with cancer in pregnancy.
The reality is it should and could be any health professional that somebody comes into contact with in pregnancy, whether it's a midwife, whether it's a health visitor, whether it's a community nurse, whether it's the GP. The point is, if somebody shares a concern with you, it is your responsibility to take that forward and try and escalate that to somebody, or at least signpost them into a pathway that will get them diagnosed early.
Aren't you smiling?
Louise is now spending whatever time she has left making memories with her family.
I urge anybody who finds anything remotely unusual, just please go to the GP, and if you're not referred, insist on being referred. It's 2 minutes, and then hopefully it'll be nothing.
Louise Beavers ending that report. Now, a look at some of the other stories making the news this lunchtime. BBC News has learned that around 200 former members of Afghanistan's special forces who were trained by Britain face imminent deportation to their Taliban-controlled homeland. The figures were gathered by a network of Afghan veterans. The UK government has denied accusations of betraying the soldiers, saying it has brought thousands of Afghans to safety. A teenage boy has appeared in court charged with murder after a woman was shot dead in East London. Leanne Gordon was killed in Hackney last Tuesday, and a man and a 16-year-old boy also suffered gunshot wounds. Today, a 16-year-old boy was remanded in custody at Barkingside Magistrates Court. He was also charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. A girl accused of the murder of the transgender teenager Brianna Ghey in February has told a jury at Manchester Crown Court that she heard a scream and turned round to see her co-accused stabbing her. The 16-year-old, identified only as Girl X, became visibly upset as she told the jury she saw another teenager, identified only as Boy Y, stabbing Brianna with a knife. Now, when Derbyshire cricketer Anuj Dal received racial abuse on social media, he was so shocked, at first he didn't know how to react. But he turned his anger into an 18-month quest to hold his abuser to account. Now he wants others to know that there is a path to restorative justice, and he's been talking to our sports correspondent, Joe Wilson.
Anuj Dal is a professional cricketer. He is the vice chair of the Professional Cricketers Association, and he fought abuse with restorative justice.
That was a very satisfying feeling, knowing that I'd covered all bases, and I felt as though I needed to do what I had done to be able to move on from it.
It all began last spring. In the wake of Azim Rafiq's racism testimony, Anuj spoke to me eloquently about the opportunity for cricket to grow. Then, on social media, Anuj himself was racially abused.
I remember we were sat together in a team meeting, ready to go and play our first game at Lord's, against Middlesex, and I was in full cricket mode. And all of a sudden, get a notification on my phone. I look at it and think, what on earth is going on? And it was, just a direct racial abusive comment directed to me based off the piece that I did with you.
Anuj was supported by the Professional Cricketers Association, by the police and by counsellors from Restorative Justice. They found the abuser, they mediated and eventually communicated a form of apology, which left me with one big question.
Whether you think restorative justice worked, and that key thing is whether it worked for you.
Absolutely, yeah, it 100% worked for me. I feel comfortable knowing that I've put him through quite a grueling process and a gruesome process to actually go through, and I've essentially turned his life around. The police have got a marker on him. Through the process, he wasn't able to leave the country. There are going to be consequences for these individuals, and hopefully now encouraging more people to say, you don't need to hide in the shadows. You don't need to brush it under the carpet. There is process, in place. There is support network in place.
Anuj Dal has a new contract with Derbyshire, the best years of sport ahead of him, and the certainty of knowing he won his justice. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Now then, we are firmly in panto season. Oh, yes, we are. But for some people with additional needs, the theatrical experience before Christmas can be a little bit overwhelming. And that's why more and more venues are now offering relaxed versions of their traditional shows, with many flashes, bangs and noisy songs toned down. Richard Forbes went to a theatre in Edinburgh, which is leading the way on this idea.
Taking their seats for a special performance. More than 600 pupils with additional support needs fill the auditorium at Edinburgh's Festival Theatre.
We're going to keep the lights up so it doesn't get so dark, and we're going to keep the volume down a bit so it's not so loud. We've taken out a lot of the crashes and bangs that might startle you, but don't worry, because all of the magic and the dancing and the jokes are still going to be there.
With the music and lights toned down, everyone can enjoy the spectacle without being overwhelmed.
What did you think of it?
It was amazing. I liked the crocodile, and it was amazing.
I think when Hoot went away, he should have met with Tinkerbell.
The children react sometimes in quite a boisterous way. It's great they can get the opportunity to do that, but if you come to an ordinary performance, it can be socially difficult to do that.
Listen, my turn to speak. The star of the show took part in the very first relaxed panto back in 2012.
I saw a comment on Facebook from a parent who said she just loved coming to the relaxed performance because for the very first time she was able to take her child to the theatre or a cinema experience without worrying what other people were going to think. And I thought that just underlined exactly how important it was, not just for the child to be able to come to the theatre, but for the parent or the carer to come with her. It's very special.
And after this performance, you can see these kids are hooked. Richard Forbes, BBC News.
Now then, here's a question. What is the UK's sexiest accent? Well, Hollywood superstar Timothée Chalamet has delivered his verdict. He says it's the Hull accent. So, we've been there to ask the people of Hull whether they think they sound sexy.
I believe in miracles. Where you're from, you sexy thing. You sexy thing, you.
My accent's real sexy.
Ladies and gentlemen, greetings to you all. My name is Willy Wonka.
Star of the new Wonka film, Timothée Chalamet is one of the world's biggest movie stars right now. He's travelled the world, but it's the Hull accent that's caught his attention.
How do you feel about the British?
I like the Hull accent.
You like Hull?
Yeah. Why is everyone cracking up?
Why is that? Is it not a sexy accent?
Hull is sexy.
You agree? Yeah. He's sexy.
Well, yeah, it's just the accent. I know, so yeah, I do, yeah.
You feel sexy?
Usually, yeah.
Are you from Hull? No. What do you think of the Hull accent?
It's lovely.
Especially when they come out with 5 and 9.
Yeah, it is the sexiest accent.
I don't think it sounds sexy personally myself, but it's everybody's own preference. Anything you desire, I'm ready, willing and able. At the hosepipe set to the fire. What about, oh no, it's snowed.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I believe in miracles since you came along, you sexy thing.
That was Susie Lawson reporting there. Now it's time for a look at the weather with Elizabeth, who's from Croydon, and they've got a lovely accent there as well, I'm sure.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you, Ben. I think I'd rather be from Hull. Nearly as good as Hull. Also looking super gorgeous in all of the sunshine. I couldn't find any Weather Watcher photos from actual Hull, so instead we have Beverley just towards the north. But there's a lot of sunshine around today. It's a much quieter looking day of weather today than at the weekend when we saw 2 named storms, Ellen and Fergus. But today, quieter, sunny spells, a few showers, yes, particularly towards eastern areas of Scotland. That's mostly because Storm Fergus, here it is just pulling away through the North Sea towards Denmark there. So a few showers. The winds will lighten towards the east coast, and our next weather system approaches from the west. Of course, that will be with us tomorrow. But for the rest of today, a line of cloud, a few showers just feeding down through the Cheshire Gap, clouding over misty conditions with moister air across parts of the southwest and western Wales. Temperatures mild, 7 to 13 degrees Celsius for most of us. And then overnight tonight, here's our next area of low pressure. That's going to be bringing heavy rain into Northern Ireland, particularly heavy across Armagh and Down, across Wales, the southwest of England, pushing through to southern Scotland into tomorrow morning. An early frost maybe out towards eastern areas, but temperatures will rise again into tomorrow morning as it tends to cloud over. There'll be some blustery showers following on behind that main weather front as that deep area of low pressure again pushes its way very slowly further eastwards throughout the day. So there'll be some heavy rain tomorrow morning across parts of Fife, East Lothian, down through northeast England as well. Blustery showers, possibly a rumble or 2 of thunder, some gusty winds as well, particularly for Irish sea coast and down through the Channel. But again, it's mild, 7 to 13 degrees Celsius, maybe 1 or 2 wintry showers for a time just over the very tops of the hills in northern Scotland. Now Wednesday, slowly improving picture as that cloud, the rain, just pushes its way further eastwards. It will be still feeling quite blustery towards eastern coastal areas, a northwesterly wind elsewhere, some brightness and of course some colder feeling air. So a drop in temperature, 3 to 9 degrees. You'll have noticed the weather front again out towards the west. That's going to be pushing eastwards as we head through Wednesday night. And of course the air is colder, so could be a bit of transient snow before it turns quickly back to rain. Any snow likely perhaps over northern Scotland, the Pennines, but turning back to rain and then clearing again on Thursday. So again, an improving picture. There'll be brightness developing once more from the west on Thursday, and then high pressure builds in from the south as we head through Thursday, and that will probably hold as we head through the rest of the week, away from the far north and the west where it could still be wet at times. Ben.
Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed. That is today's BBC News at 1. You can keep up to date with all the very latest developments on our BBC website. Now, though, it's time to join our colleagues for a look at the news where you are. But from me and the team, do have a very good afternoon.